One of the things that we need to recognize as believers is that we are not required to give or tithe in order to receive salvation, right? There's no work that we need to do in order to look better in the eyes of God. Like that should be the first disclaimer that we put out there. And so when I say like we are called to give and it is kind of our duty as believers, it's more because as Christians, we are supposed to model ourselves after Christ. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just being generous.
Welcome to Her Desired Human Podcast, a community where we come together to discuss all things Jesus, family, life, and faith. I am your host, LaShaundra. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's guest is a woman with a passion for empowering individuals to manage their money in alignment with their faith. Her diverse experiences have shaped her understanding of the intersection between faith and finances. She is the visionary behind Redeeming Your Finances, an online school for believers to learn how to manage their money using skills that are rooted in the gospel. Please welcome mother, wife, investor, and financial counselor, Katie Jones, to the show.
Hey,
Katie.
LaShaundra. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. So, Katie, I want you to share a little bit about your testimony because you are passionate about helping believers become financially wise, right? And you want them to learn skills to manage their money that are rooted in like biblical principles, which you don't really hear a lot, right? So, I know that for you personally, this was not always a priority for you, a desire for you in your personal life. So can you share your faith and financial testimony with our community?
Yeah. Yeah, you put it really well in saying that this wasn't always a part of my story. This wasn't what I was always doing. Or, I mean, really what it was I kind of thought I was doing that I was helping people really bring biblical principles into the way that they were managing their money. But when I really took a look at it, at the root of what I was doing was kind of preaching the prosperity gospel. Like it was really frustrating to me once I had realized this, because I really did go through my own financial journey with the intention of glorifying and honoring God. I kind of took the Bible verse from Colossians 3:23, which says, work at it with all of your heart as if working for the Lord. And I kind of made this like my mantra. And I was like, I'm going to do all these things for God. And like, while I do this, it's also going to help me achieve all of my goals and my dreams and live this wonderful, comfortable life. And it wasn't until I was exposed to it when I read a book called Getting Over Yourself. And it's all about kind of like how we make the gospel about us and our own dreams and goals, and really push God's idea for how to live life to the wayside. I read that book and I was like, oh my gosh, no, I really have been falling for the prosperity gospel. I mean, so many of us do this without actually recognizing it. And so that's when I started changing the way that I was teaching and helping others with their finances, because I realized that me as a money coach at the time, that I was kind of falling for it myself, even though I wouldn't have recognized it until it was like brought to my attention. So, yeah.
Wow. So you didn't recognize or identify when you kind of fell prey to the prosperity gospel until you read the book?
Yeah, definitely. It was, I mean, again, like we oftentimes, even like from faith-based financial professionals, we hear, okay, we need to get out of debt as quickly as possible. We need to save up as much as possible. And we do all these things. And then once we get to this point where we're debt free and we have enough saved for our retirement and we can kind of achieve all of our financial goals, then we should go and work on being really generous to other people. And when we focus on our finances that way, you may recognize that we're focusing on ourselves first, and then we put other people after we've kind of filled our own buckets. And there's like a time and a place for some of these things that, there's definitely something we're saying like, okay, when you eliminate your debt, you really become more free to give wherever God might be calling you to. You know, debt really is a generosity killer, and we really should work on paying off our debt. We really should work on saving up money. But when we continue to focus on only ourselves and our goals and our dreams, we really focus on what we may or may not recognize is the prosperity gospel.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Like you said, you didn't realize that you fell into it until you read the book and you start to really reflect on your decisions, your
Mm-hmm.
choices, your journey. Reading is important. Like, pick up a book. There's good information in these books, like, that can change your life. It's so important. And that's something that I feel like people just take for granted. Like, start reading and you could just learn so much in life.
I
Seriously.
love reading. I love books so much. And you're so right. I mean, there's so much to be learned from the Bible alone, but then
Yeah.
when we read books that are faith-based, you get like these new perspectives on Bible verses and stories that you've probably read over and over, but then you see it from somebody else's perspective when they start to open the curtains and shed light on these areas of your life where you're like, oh wow, like this, I think, like, I feel like I'm making this about God, but the enemy has really taken this like truth, and or it's taken this lie and it's wrapped it up in like in a truth, right? And so it's like that idea of taking a wolf and wrapping it into sheep's clothing, so that way we think it's innocent, but when you kind of peel back the layers, you're like, oh wow, I really am actually following this lie, and I had no idea that I was doing it. And this happens in all areas of our lives where the enemy is just so sneaky to tell us that you're doing this for God. It's all good. And we are using these scriptures that tell you to have a budget. You're using these scriptures that tell you to pay off your debt and to save money and to invest and do all these things. These are all really great things, but there's a time and a place, but it really comes down to our heart and what our heart is really at the like what it's really desiring, and it's something that we have to reevaluate consistently. Like it's a daily thing. And even for me, even though I've recognized this now, it doesn't mean that I still get it, like I still get it wrong, right? I'm not perfect in how I'm managing my money and using my finances, and it's something that we have to continuously renew and continue to learn. And yeah, like you said, read books, like learn what other people are saying, so that way we can be equipped and become stronger to fight against these lies that the enemy wants us to believe are God's truth. I mean, it's kind of like how Adam and Eve, when they were deceived by the serpent in the garden, the serpent like takes these like beautiful things that we can desire, like wisdom and truth, and he's like, oh, does God say that you would die when you eat this fruit? And it's like, no, you won't. You'll have more wisdom and all these things. And it's like these sneaky little things that the enemy really uses to get us to ultimately believe a lie. And we think we're doing it for the right reasons, or we kind of try to do it for the right reasons, maybe.
It's important, I think, to have, like you said, it's something you have to do daily. Have that relationship with God, because as soon as you get off track, He will come get you and let you know, hey, back
Mm-hmm.
over here. So I think that's important. So many times we try to separate faith and finances, but why do you believe it's so important to kind of combine the two?
I think our faith really has to impact every area of our lives. The Bible actually has over 2,300 verses that mention things like money, wealth, possession, and finances. There's so much that the Bible has to say about these things. And the mistake that I had made was looking at them and seeing them as like this blueprint to making lots of money, right? And I was like, oh yeah, I have to just follow all these things and then I'll get it right. But what it really comes down to with these verses is God is just trying to warn us. Like he's trying to put up these like hazard signs to say money does have some kind of power to it, right? When you have money, you can buy a lot of things. You can get out of situations, you can get into situations. And it's not, we all know money doesn't buy us happiness at the end of the day, but it really does have an influence over other people when you have money. And God knows that. He knows that when we have money, it can be really dangerous for ourselves and for others. And so we have to walk this line very carefully to understand how we can participate in kingdom work versus building up like our own kingdoms, right? We want to participate in building the kingdom of God as believers, not necessarily Katie's kingdom or LaShaundra's kingdom. We need to understand how to bring our faith into this so that way we can be more purposeful with how we use our money. And it's not to say like having money is bad. I mean, there's so many amazing examples of people throughout the Bible who had a lot of wealth and who were actually blessed with wealth. I mean, all the patriarchs of our faith, like Abraham himself, like he was very wealthy. Someone like Job was very wealthy. Like these were all people who were blessed and given a lot. We even have examples in the New Testament. Matthew, like even one of the disciples, he's a tax collector. He kind of by his job, the nature of it, he probably had a lot of money. And we see that because he threw this wonderful, elaborate banquet for Jesus to come and sit down with other tax collectors and oh, the big bad sinners, right? We hear about that story. And it's like when you have wealth, we have to look at doing things like that. Like, how can we be disciples of Jesus and use our finances to glorify God? And that can happen in so many ways, but our faith has to be a part of the conversation when we think about the way that we view and use our money.
Yeah, this reminds me of the verse where it talks about how God gives us the ability to even get wealth and stuff. And
Mhm.
so we should inevitably like just make it a priority to honor him, right? So everything that God has blessed us with, he's called us to be a good steward over it, where it's our children, our, bodies, our finance, like our possessions, whatever it is, right? So how can we begin to do that? How can we begin to be good stewards over our finances and honor God? Like, what are some practical ways we can honor God with our finances?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And that's ultimately what I help individuals and couples do with their finances is guiding them to have a gospel-centered financial system, like a financial plan for what they're going to do with their money and with these resources that God has ultimately entrusted to us. Having this kind of a system, the way that I actually teach it within my school, Redeeming Your Finances, it's an online financial school for believers. We go through these 5 pillars of a gospel centered financial plan, which is to give, live, save, owe, and grow. And in each part of this plan, we have to assess how God wants us to be using our money. I put give first because giving is like that foundational principle for us as believers is being generous, just like God was generous with us by giving us Jesus, and then Jesus was generous with us by giving his life, right? And if we want to model that kind of generosity, it needs to happen within our finances. It also needs to happen with our time, and our talents. Like where are we going to spend our time? How are we going to use the giftings that God has given us? And all these things can kind of come together to create our own generosity philosophy and giving plan. And so that's kind of step one. Step number 2 is that live pillar, and we build a budget, and it's a whole system of going through and understanding like where our money's going so we can be really intentional with how we deploy every dollar that we use. And so we have to ask those questions of like, where is God asking me to just spend my money today? And it's not to say like we have to give everything away. We have to take care of our families. We have to take care of our responsibilities that are before us. So it's just all about balance. Um, and so like this plan is not going to be a one size fits all for anybody. Like that is, I don't love when people are like, if you just follow these steps, like it's going to all work out, because ultimately that's just not how life works. We're all gifted with different talents from God. We all are put into different circumstances and situations. Who the people that are around us impacts the way that we manage money, whether we have children or we're single or we are living in a large family or who our neighbors are, even like all these different areas impact the way that we spend our money. And so that's what I love about like getting to work with individuals one-on-one, is to help them understand like how to build this in a way that's like personal to them, that glorifies God and still takes care of all those responsibilities that they have. So yeah, it's just asking lots of good questions when you build this kind of a plan.
I love how the first step is to give, because that's the quickest way to see where a person's mind and their heart is at. Like some people might
Yes.
struggle to get past step one. So
Yeah,
yeah.
Billy Graham's has an amazing quote of like, show me a person's, this is back in the time. He says pocketbook. Show me this person's pocketbook and I'll show you where their heart is at. And it really is so true.
Yeah.
Like if you could see like where somebody spends the majority of their money, you could really understand like what captures their heart. I mean, the same thing could be said about your thoughts or the time that you spend. Where do you
Mhm.
spend the majority of your time? Is that, what are you prioritizing in all these areas of your life?
You mentioned that at one point money had became an idol in your life, right? And that you began to worship money more than you were worshiping God. Can you share like with our listeners, how can they begin to like identify when money is starting to slowly take the place of God in their lives?
Yeah. Money really is like a perfect idol. What my friend Bob Loddick, he's another awesome professional in this space. He says that a lot. Like money really does make this perfect idol because money is like a form of power. Kind of like I was saying, like we could do a lot with money. And when we see it as this power that can kind of give us security or a hope for our future, when we are like, okay, if I just have an emergency fund or enough savings to be able to buy the next car or, send my kids to college debt free, like we feel like we would have this sense of security when these things are all accomplished with our finances. Or when just simply, it's actually a quote from the book Redeeming Money by Paul Tripp. And he says, when we, like so many of us, are seduced by asking money to do for us what only God can do. And that is ultimately when we ask money to do for us these things, like give us comfort and security and a hope for our future, that's when it's become an idol. When we think that money is going to be our ultimate security, that's that point when we think that it's more secure to pursue money than it is to pursue God. And so again, it's a constant renewing that you have to do in order to recognize when these lies are infiltrating your mind about your finances. Because I mean, I'm not going to lie. When my bank account is full, like when I see that I have a nice full emergency fund, I feel good. Like I feel secure. I feel like nothing can touch me if anything happens. But we all know that's not true, right? It's
Mhm.
not money that's going to keep us secure in these times. It really is God. And so that's when, if we believe these things about money, that's when it becomes an idol.
It gives you like that false sense of security, right? And
Mhm.
then things
Mhm.
happen to shake up the earth, and then you realize, okay, maybe let me get back to God. Maybe this isn't as secure as I thought it was. So
Definitely
yeah,
not.
he always reminds us, like, I'm your source. He always reminds us who the source is. So on the other hand, many Christians might be struggling financially and they might lack like the financial education they need to kind of really break those cycles. In your opinion, and we kind of spoke about this a little earlier, is it okay for Christians to be rich and wealthy? Like, should they always be consistently like struggling and broke all the time? What do you think?
I really like this question because I think it's so easy to point fingers at any situation where somebody has very little money and saying like they are financially unhealthy, and there is some truth to that, right? Like if you have lots of debt and if you are living paycheck to paycheck and really struggling to make ends meet and cover all of your responsibilities, there might be an element of financial unhealthiness. But when we look at the Bible to kind of help us define what financial health is, we realize that our financial health really is all about whether we are aligned with the gospel or not. And so if you think of it at like a spectrum of like impoverished, living to extreme wealth and riches, like you think of it as two ends of the spectrum, and you think that somebody who has lots and lots of wealth might be very financially healthy. And yes, in the world's eyes, that is how we describe financial health. But in God's eyes, that person who has lots of money might be extremely financially unhealthy in that spiritual sense, because their mind is so wrapped up in the next dollar and getting more and just hustling a lot. But the same can be said for somebody in the middle end of the spectrum, like whether you are someone who's just kind of like getting by, it's totally fine. You're like, I've got this covered. Or maybe you're kind of like in the, upper middle class where you're just kind of comfortable. You've got everything taken care of. If you are not actively asking how to participate in the mission work of Christ here on earth, I would actually argue that you are financially unhealthy. And it's so important for us as believers to be asking those questions, to get involved in kingdom work. And again, it's not to say that you have to go and give everything away, right? Like I think so many people are like, oh, if you're a Christian financial counselor, all you're going to do is tell me to just give everything away. No, that's not true. I mean, look at the Proverbs 31 woman and you will see things like her, like examples from her life. She was a real estate investor. First off, she would buy fields and she would take care of these fields and then make money from them. And she would provide for her family so well. Like they were clothed in some of the best clothing in town. But yes, she also did provide for those who were living on the streets. She provided clothing and food for those people too. And so she took really good care of her family, but also took care of her neighbors. And so it's a balance between all these things, because we're told to kind of take care of our families and look for people, like the needs around us. And so there's not necessarily we have to be poor or we have to be rich. It's just we have to be aligned with the gospel. And so that's kind of this mindset shift that we need to start making when it comes to financial health for believers.
Speaking of giving everything away, I want to talk about giving really quick, because there's always like some people don't believe in tithe and offering, or they choose not to partake in it, or they don't help anyone. Like people just really have, I guess, that perspective about it. And we know that giving is mentioned in the Bible, and God desires us to be cheerful givers. How do you believe that giving and generosity is like declining within the body so much?
Yeah, why is it declining? That is actually a really good question. I think it's a few different elements. One of the things that we need to recognize as believers is that we are not required to give or tithe in order to receive salvation, right? There's no work that we need to do in order to look better in the eyes of God. Like that should be the first disclaimer that we put out there. And so when I say like we are called to give and it is kind of our duty as believers, it's more because as Christians, we are supposed to model ourselves after Christ. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just being generous. I really do believe that we tend to be outrageously generous in so many ways. But I think as far as it declining, I think a lot of people are scared. They don't trust God necessarily to continue to provide for them if they are outrageously generous. If they see someone who, like a single mom who's really struggling to pay for groceries for her kids because she can't work a lot because she has to all to take care of her kids, and somebody sees that and is like, my heart is breaking for that woman. I want to be able to help her. But then they're like, well, if I give a lot to her and help her pay for her groceries, will I actually be able to pay for my groceries this month? And it's like this doubt that kind of creeps in, that we just don't trust God when he calls us to these little things like go spend $100, buy her groceries this week. We need to take that leap of faith to trust that God is calling us to something good and he will provide for us in the meantime. I think it also comes down to our own comforts, because it might mean giving something up that month or that week or whenever in order to be generous. And being a cheerful giver is kind of one of the four characteristics that I describe as kind of like biblical generosity. One of my other favorite characteristics is sacrificial giving. And this I think is one of the more important elements of our giving, is that it's really easy to be like, oh, I have an extra $10. I'll give this away this month. Like, super easy because I've already kind of covered everything that I want to do. But sacrificial giving is giving when you actually have to give something up yourself. There's a trade-off for you. And so you think about, if you have only $100 left in your budget for groceries, and you have to kind of make that decision of, am I going to give something up here or help somebody else? We have to be sacrificial at times. And so if the believer on the other end of this podcast is like, yeah, well, I do tithe, I do give 10%, or I do give, pretty generously, but it's not like hurting you just slightly. Like, I'm not saying like go give and like everything away again, but we need to actually understand, like, Jesus gave literally everything for us, literally. And if we aren't sacrificial with the way that we are using our money, we aren't really getting to the point of what Jesus is trying to teach us when it comes to giving and generosity. It's like you have to give something up yourself in order for it to be kind of this sacrificial giving that he desires for us.
I do want to also mention, maybe this may play a part in it, that some people have been taken advantage of, like in relation to prosperity gospel. Like, some people have been taken advantage of, and they've been used, and they've been robbed, or whatever the case may be, within the church, which is very sad. So unfortunately, there might be trauma wrapped and surrounded around going to church or giving and stuff like that. So I did want to mention that, and I can understand why people are might be hesitant if that's the reason why.
That's a really great point, because I have had believers who I've worked with who are in between churches and things like that. And they're like, yeah, I gave before, but then I saw my church do some really not great things, like things that I just didn't agree with. So even if they're like a mildly healthy church, like not even like the prosperity gospel kind of churches where it's like, if you give money, then you're going to be blessed and you're going to get to heaven. And it, like, even if it's not a church that's, promoting these kind of ideologies, but simply just your neighborhood church who you're like, I just didn't agree with the way that they were using the money that I was giving. And so now I'm really hesitant to give to the new church that I'm going to go to, because I want to make sure like they're going to be financially sound first. And it's not our responsibility to figure out how that money is ultimately going to be used, right? Like, we have to do we have to do the trusting that we are giving to the kingdom of God, like the big C church here on earth. And it is just, again, it's our duty and it's our obligation to kind of trust God that we're giving our dollars to this church. Yes, the people who are managing the money are broken and flawed, just like I am. But God is ultimately going to use this money for his glory, even if my pastor or the staff or whoever's making the decisions with this money, even if they're not making decisions that I agree with. And it's not our duty to kind of continue, to police exactly where every dollar is. Sure, if there is corruption going on, say something. Don't just let it keep going. Yeah. But again, like, if you have that fear, it's another way that the enemy is kind of infiltrating your mind to believe that you shouldn't participate in this kingdom building work because, like, it'll be used inappropriately. And so just, again, trust God. He is the one who provides the results, and he is the one that needs to get the glory at the end of the day.
It's a matter of just releasing control. We want to control
Yeah.
everything, but we can't. We
Yeah.
have to just trust him. Can't control everything, right? So
Absolutely.
ultimately to overcome like our money issues, we have to really truly rely on God. We have to invite him into our finances, and we have to
Mm,
trust that he's going to equip us with the support, with the resources, with the, the tools and skills we need to really be able to obtain true financial freedom, like what God desires for us. So, speaking of true financial freedom, I have a question for you.
hmm
In your opinion, um, can you define or describe what true financial freedom is in one sentence? What it is, or maybe like what it looks like? What is true financial freedom?
Grace. It really comes down to kind of this rescuing and redeeming grace that God can only offer us. Um, when we allow the Holy Spirit to kind of come and do this life transforming work inside of us, the kind that only He can do, our minds start to change in what we think we need. We oftentimes think of, again, financial health as kind of getting to the next level with our money, or getting more stuff, or getting the bigger house or the better car. But when we really put our life and our finances in the hands of God, and he can kind of do that life transforming work inside of us, we find freedom from always needing more or better or bigger. And that's when we can actually experience this freedom that only God can give, because right now we are so, I mean, and I say right now, but it's always, we are going to be corrupted by things like envy or pride or greed, or just like our self-deserving desires. And when we invite the grace of God into our money decisions, that's when we can actually start to experience this freedom from needing something else to fulfill those things for us.
That's really good. So if there's a true financial freedom, then there must be a false financial freedom. So if you can describe that, what that looks like, what is false financial freedom in your own words?
Yeah. My journey started with kind of wanting to pursue this idea of financial independence. And for those who don't know about financial independence, it's all about having enough money set aside, like in your savings, or having enough money coming in passively through investments in order to not have to continue to trade your time for money. So like you have enough money, it's kind of this idea of like once you have enough you can retire and not have to work anymore, right? And I was really obsessed with kind of pursuing this idea of financial independence at an early age, like not like something like wait on the road if I can get there one day. I really was hustling to try to do that here and now, in my young adult life. And what I recognized, again, kind of when I was starting to read these books and really get like my eyes were opened, to what I was doing was, yes, I was pursuing kind of this financial independence, but what I was also doing was trying to pursue like independence from God. I wanted to be able to be self-sustaining. And this word is like kind of a hype word. Like in our time is like, I want to be sustainable. Like I want to be self-sustaining and not have to rely on anybody else. But when we say that, we don't also realize we're kind of becoming independent from needing God. And so we really need to have this like financial dependence on Christ to be our provider, to be our comfort and security, and not pursuing our money for this kind of independent life that we want.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So you are a certified Christian financial counselor. So have you seen, I guess, as believers, do you see a great value in getting a counselor who focuses on gospel centered money management? Like, have your students or clients seen a benefit to this and seen a difference than as opposed to working with someone who's not Christian based?
Yeah. Yes, I would hope that most of them would say yes, that it's been very different. Actually, I a lot of the people that I have worked with over the years have tried different financial online schools and different, you know, trying to follow other money professionals, and even ones who claim to be Christian or faith-based. And I think there really is a big difference between somebody who teaches about money management and then kind of sprinkles on some Bible verses saying like, okay, we're going to build a budget and we're going to do this. And like, okay, Luke 14:28 says, if you would want to build a tower, wouldn't you first sit down and make sure you have enough money to pay for it? And it's like, okay, we need to have a budget. We need to save money. And it's like, this is kind of how I taught before. Like I used to just kind of say, well, these are the money steps we need to take. Here's some Bible verses that help support our path that we're going to take. And there's a lot of great-ish, financial people out there who kind of teach this way. And it's not to say that all of them are bad. A lot of them have really good intentions. But I think the main difference is my goal with working with the clients that I do is not necessarily to make them super wealthy and rich, and like it's just not what I want for them, because ultimately I don't think it's what God wants for them. But in the meantime, like when we kind of pursue our financial path the way that God really wants us to, like inviting him into the conversation day by day with our money decisions, I do think that there is room for financial blessing. I do, and I have seen God bless people this way. I mean, he did it in the Old Testament and he did it in the New Testament too. Like there's biblical examples of like people who were after God's heart that ultimately did receive financial wealth as a reward for following him. And I think that he can do that today. But what he wants to see is being able to start with the very little that you have and manage it so well and be generous with it and pursue his heart in when you have just very little, because then he can see that you're going to be responsible with having more wealth. Because a lot of us think like, oh, once I get to that point, then I can be generous and follow God. But what he wants to see is like when you're making like ends meet, he wants to see your faithfulness right here, right now. And so that's what I try to do with my clients is let's get faithful. Like, let's be faithful stewards right now. And yeah, maybe he'll bless you with wealth, like lots and lots of wealth one day. But at the end of the day, it's also not the goal. It's not like that is what we're aiming for. We're aiming to be financially and spiritually healthy and aligned with the gospel at all points of our financial journey, no matter where we're at.
Yeah, I love that. If he can trust you with the little, then he can trust you with more, right? So I love that so much. So speaking of Bible verses, I wanted to share Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. And it says, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. What are some practical steps that families can take to kind of build like generational wealth is what they keep talking about. Generational wealth, building that and legacy and being able to pass that on. What are maybe like the first 3 steps that a family can take to begin that journey?
I actually I read this amazing book recently by Jefferson Bethke called Taking Back Your Family. It actually doesn't have to do with finances, but he actually talks a little bit about money inside of this book when raising your kids. And one of the things I actually really loved is this idea of like, we're all on mission together as a family. Like let's work on this kind of mission that we're on together and make decisions together when it comes to like our family budget. And I think one of the best ways that we can equip our children to inherit money, like I think the first thing is just having that gospel-centered financial system for your finances. Like figure it out for your family. But if you want to prepare your kids to inherit whatever that system is that you have, like whatever wealth that you can pass on to that next generation, you need to equip them with these principles and these teachings so they can handle it appropriately when they do inherit this, whether it's a little or a lot. But that's like one of the best things you can do for your kids is teach them how to manage their money in light of the gospel before they get out there and have the chance to kind of maybe fail miserably. Like
Yeah.
you want to equip them. And so invite them into the conversation. Like obviously don't give them like free reign to like go spend money however they want. But when you're making decisions on where to spend your money or where to give your money, like that's a great time to bring your kids and be like, hey, what needs have you seen within your friend groups, within like the school, within like from our neighbors? And their eyes and ears might be open to things that you might not have even noticed. And they might be like, my friend, like, hasn't had a new pair of shoes in the last like year and they're wearing the same shoes every single day. Like I would love to put that on our giving list to like buy this kid new shoes. And it's just like inviting them in to have these conversations helps to equip them to be good stewards when they are adults and when they are on their own. And so when you think about passing on generational wealth, I think you should think of the actual skills too that can be passed along to your children. But if you're looking to kind of be able to build up that wealth for your kids, it's simply just getting a good system in place for yourself. And again, having that like actual true gospel centered financial system.
That was really great. I think it's important for us to, even at a young age, include them in that. And then as we train them up and model the behaviors that we're telling them.
Yeah,
I mean, we can't just say do something and we're not modeling it, because even when we think they're not paying attention, trust me, they are. So
exactly.
modeling those behaviors are important as well. Speaking of kids, you are a wife and a mother. So I want to
Mhm.
know, what has been your greatest obstacle that you faced when teaching your kids about finances?
That's a great question. My son right now, he is about 10 months old. My husband and I actually though are foster parents and have had children who are older in our home for the last few years. And and that comes with a lot of other challenges just because of some of the trauma that they have experienced, especially around finances for them. And so that's slightly different. But some of the things that have worked well for us is honestly just giving them the chance to fail in small ways. So, they're like giving them a small allowance where, okay, if you have $10, you as the money manager get to decide how you spend these $10. And sure, they might go and spend it all at one place and it might all be candy. And you might not agree with that. But if they start to learn these lessons now of like, I can go spend all my $10 here, or maybe I could save this $10 and then next week I get another $10 and now I have $20. Like, what can I do with $20? And it just starts to help teach them a little bit of responsibility and kind of the phrase like opportunity cost, right? Like if you spend everything right now, you're not going to have the opportunity to buy something else with this, or you could save it up and you could get something bigger. And so yeah, just it really helps to teach them delayed gratification and yeah, things like opportunity cost and just but it gives them the chance to fail in very small ways so that way when they get out into the real world and they have a paycheck and they're like, oh my gosh, I could go and spend this all on like a really elaborate dinner or go on this fancy vacation, but then they forget to save for new car tires or something, and then they're like, now I have to go into debt for buying these car tires. Maybe I should have started saving instead of buying all these, things that I thought I needed. So if you give your kids the chance to start doing it in small ways where it doesn't make as big of a impact on like their actual well-being, like then like they'll be ready and more equipped to get to responsibly make decisions with their money in the future.
I want to know, what's one, you shared a lot of scriptures today, but I want to know, what's one Bible verse that you want our listeners to remember from our conversation today, specifically about finances?
I actually really like Second Corinthians 3:17. It says, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." And I think it's not specific to finances, but when we talk about financial freedom, again, it really comes down to inviting God into this conversation, allowing the Spirit to guide you. And so wherever you're at with your finances, and if you're looking for that freedom, it really does begin with inviting God in. And so, yeah, no matter if you're in a lot of debt or just looking to align the wealth that you have with God's goals and design for your money, inviting God into that conversation is going to give you the freedom that you are actually seeking and desiring.
I love that one. So you have an online school, you said it's called Redeeming Your Finances, where believers can learn to manage their money God's way. How can our listeners learn more about your school or connect with you online?
Yeah. If they go to redeemingyourfinances.com, that's where they can learn about the school. I also have a lot of free resources there. So if someone's just kind of like trying to figure out what the first step is, I would highly recommend going there and grabbing my free gospel centered budgeting planner. It's a great place to start if you're looking to kind of get into this. If you've never set up a budget before, or if you have set up a budget and just kind of need a refreshing way to look at it from that gospel perspective, it's a great, easy place to start for free.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie, for coming on the show and sharing all this financial wisdom with our community. And to our lovely listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.